The night everything changed, the hall of Ashvale was full of laughter. Long tables stretched from one end of the great room to the other, covered in food and drink, and the proud faces of wolves who believed they were untouchable. Candles burned in rows along the walls. The smell of roasted meat filled the air. At the head of the table sat Caden Voss, Alpha King of the most powerful pack in the northern lands, and he looked exactly like a man who had never once doubted himself. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and cold in the way that mountains are cold. He did not smile often. He did not need to. People obeyed him without smiles. They feared him without being given reasons. He had built that fear carefully, the way other men build fortresses, one stone at a time, over many years. That evening, before the feast began, he had signed the final order of banishment for a young woman named Lyra Sinclair. He had not felt anything when he signed it. Lyra was an Omega, which in the world of their kind meant she sat at the lowest rank of the pack. She was quiet, small, and had spent most of her life being overlooked. 3 years ago, fate had done something no one expected. The bond, the rare and ancient pull that connected two wolves as true mates, had appeared between her and Caden. Everyone in the room had felt it the moment it surfaced. It was like a sudden warmth in the chest, a recognition so deep it had no words. Caden had looked at her across that crowded hall, felt the pull, and then looked away. He had stood in front of his entire court and said, in a clear and steady voice, that he did not accept the bond, that her bloodline was impure, that she was beneath the crown, that the bond meant nothing to him, and neither did she. Lyra had not cried. She had stood very still, lifted her chin, and walked out of the hall without a single word. 3 years later, she had been formally banished. The paperwork was clean, the decision was final. As far as Caden was concerned, the matter was closed. He raised his glass at the feast, toasted his generals and his brothers, and drank deeply. By morning, his father was dead. The poison had been in the ceremonial wine, a rare and terrible thing called the hollow rot, known in the oldest pack histories as a blood curse that moved through royal alpha blood like fire through dry wood. It did not kill quickly, it unraveled. It stripped away the wolf piece by piece, taking the healing first, then the strength, then the ability to shift, and finally the life itself. His 2 younger brothers, Ren and Aldrich, were unconscious before sunrise. His father never woke at all. The generals who had drunk from the same batch were bedridden, some already beyond help. The pack healers moved through the halls of Ashvale with pale faces and lowered voices. When they came to Caden with their findings, he was already sick. He could feel it, a heaviness beneath his skin, something wrong in his blood, like a song being played in the wrong key. The lead healer, an old woman named Mara who had served the Voss line for 40 years, looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. She looked sorry for him. She told him the only known cure for the hollow rot was the blood of a true mate, given willingly, not extracted, not taken, freely offered, through a bond that was still intact. Caden stared at her. He had rejected his only true mate 3 years ago. He had then banished her, 2 nights before this feast. Mara said nothing else. She did not need to. He sent scouts out within the hour. It took them 4 days to find Lyra. She had settled in a small border town called Mirenfield, far from pack territory, far from everything she had known. She was working with a local herbalist, a kind older man who asked no questions and paid fair wages. She had a small room above the shop. She had a routine. She had a life that was quiet and entirely her own. When the scouts arrived at the shop door, she opened it, looked at the Ashvale crest on their jackets, and said she was not interested. They told her the Alpha King was requesting her presence. She told them the Alpha King could send someone else. She closed the door. Caden received their report and said nothing for a long time. Then he told them to prepare a single horse. He was going himself. The ride to Mirenfield took 2 days. He made it in 1.5, pushing through the pain that was now constant in his chest, a dull and worsening ache that reminded him with every breath what was happening to him. His wolf, which had always felt like a second heartbeat, had gone almost silent. That silence was the most frightening thing he had ever experienced. He arrived at the herbalist's shop just before dusk. The sign above the door was hand-painted, and slightly crooked. Through the window, he could see shelves lined with small glass jars and dried bundles of plants hanging from the ceiling. It looked peaceful in a way that Ashvale, for all its grandeur, had never managed to be. He knocked. Lyra opened the door. She was wearing a plain dress with an apron over it, and her dark hair was pulled back from her face. She looked at him with the same calm expression he remembered, the one that gave nothing away. She had always been hard to read. He had once thought it was because she had nothing worth saying. He understood now that it was because she had learned very early not to let people see what they could use against her. She looked at him for a moment, then at the gray color of his skin and the stiffness in the way he held himself. She said simply that she knew what he had come for. He said yes. She said no. Then she told him that she had spent 3 years building a life in which no one looked at her the way he had looked at her that night in the hall. Like she was a problem to be dismissed. Like her existence was an inconvenience. She had been called impure in front of everyone she had ever known, and she had survived it, and she was not going to walk back into the place that had done that to her, simply because it had become useful for her to exist again. He stood on her doorstep and did not argue. She started to close the door. He said he understood. She stopped. He said he would not force her, that he had not come with soldiers, that he had come alone, which she could verify by looking up and down the empty street, which she did. He said he was not there to make demands. He said he did not know how to do this, that he had spent his whole life giving orders, and that asking for something was not something he had much practice in. He said he was asking. She looked at him for a long time. Then she stepped aside and let him in. She did not let him in because she had forgiven him. She let him in because she was an herbalist, and she could see that he was genuinely unwell, and it was against everything in her nature to leave a sick creature suffering on her doorstep, even one who had once treated her like she was invisible. She sat him down at the small table in the back of the shop and made him tea while he told her everything. About the feast, about his father, about his brothers lying unconscious in the palace, about the healer's diagnosis, about the enemy pack to the east, which had already begun moving troops toward Ashvale's borders, knowing the kingdom was weakened. She listened without interrupting. She asked a few quiet questions about his brother's symptoms. She moved between her shelves with the ease of someone who knew exactly where everything was. When he was finished speaking, she told him that she could help his brothers, that she had the knowledge and the materials to prepare something that would slow the progression of the rot and give them more time. She said she would do it because they were innocent and did not deserve to suffer for a crime they did not commit. She said she was not doing it for him. He said he understood. She worked through the evening, grinding and mixing and measuring in the light of a single lamp. He watched her and did not speak. He had not expected this. He had not expected her to help at all, and he had certainly not expected her to help so immediately and so carefully. He had imagined, on the long ride here, that she would be bitter, that she would turn him away with anger. He had prepared himself for anger. Calm was harder to sit with than anger. Anger he knew how to respond to. At some point, she set a bowl of soup in front of him without comment. He ate it without comment. Outside, the night settled over Mirenfield, and the town was very quiet. When the medicine was ready, she packed it carefully into small sealed containers and told him the instructions for the healers. Then she told him that this would buy time, but not much, that the only true cure required the bond. He said he knew, she said, and her voice was still calm, still even, that a bond could not be forced, that it required both people to choose it, that even if he was willing to accept what he had thrown away 3 years ago, she was not certain she was willing to offer it, that her blood, given through the bond, was not simply medicine. It was a part of herself, and she would not give it to someone who saw her as a resource. He said he did not see her as a resource. She looked at him. He looked back at her, and for once, he did not look like a king. He looked like a man who was tired and frightened and had run out of things to hide behind. He told her the truth. He told her that when the bond had appeared 3 years ago, it had hit him harder than anything he had ever felt, that it had terrified him, that he had spent his entire life learning that strength meant needing nothing and no one, and in one single moment, standing across a hall from a woman he had never spoken to, he had felt something so strong it had nearly brought him to his knees. He said that he had rejected her not because she was beneath him, but because he was afraid of what it meant to need someone that deeply. That the only way he knew how to handle that fear was to destroy it before it could destroy him. He said it was the worst thing he had ever done. He said he had told himself it was a practical decision, a political one. He had believed that for a long time, because it was easier to believe that than to admit he had publicly humiliated a person who had done nothing wrong, out of pure cowardice. He said he was sorry, not as a king making an apology to preserve an alliance, as a person who had caused pain and was only now capable of admitting it. Lyra was quiet for a long time. Then she said that sorry did not undo 3 years. He said he knew. She said that she had not spent those 3 years being broken. She had spent them becoming someone who knew her own value, someone who no longer needed anyone else to confirm it. She said that if she chose to restore the bond, it would not be because she needed him, it would be because she chose to. There was a difference. He said he understood the difference. She stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the dark street for a long moment. Then she turned around, and the expression on her face had shifted into something softer and more complicated than he had seen all evening. She said she had not stopped feeling the bond. She had tried. She had moved away, built walls, filled her days with work and small routines, and it had helped, but it had never fully gone quiet. She said that was the thing about a true bond. You could reject it, but it did not go away. It just waited. She crossed the room and stood in front of him. She placed her hand against his chest, over the left side, where the pull of the bond lived like a faint and patient ember. The moment she touched him, it came back. Not slowly, all at once. Like a window thrown open in a dark room, he felt it move through him, warm and certain, and the sick gray heaviness in his blood flinched back from it like shadow from light. She closed her eyes. He could see on her face the moment she made the choice, not because she had to, not because the situation demanded it, but because she looked inside herself and found that she still wanted to. She allowed the bond to fully restore itself. Her blood carried the ancient power of her bloodline, something older than Ashvale, older than the laws that had tried to erase it. As the bond settled into place between them, that power moved through it like water through a channel that had been waiting to be opened. It reached into him and began to undo what the hollow rot had done. He did not speak. There were no words large enough for what was happening. When she opened her eyes, she looked steadier than he felt. She told him she would come back to Ashvale to help his brothers personally and see the cure through to completion. She told him she was not coming back as a trophy, or as a queen, or as a symbol of anything. She was coming back as herself. And if anyone in that court looked at her the way they had looked at her 3 years ago, she would leave, and no force on earth would bring her back a third time. He said he would make sure of it. They left Mirenfield at dawn. When they reached Ashvale, Lyra went directly to the brothers' chamber and worked with the healers for 2 days straight, barely sleeping. Ren recovered first. Aldrich took longer. But by the end of the 3rd day, both of them were sitting up and eating on their own. The enemy pack, expecting to find a kingdom in chaos, arrived at the border to find a fully restored Alpha King, waiting for them, with a clear head and no patience for negotiations. The threat dissolved within a week. Caden repealed the law that had allowed a mate to be rejected publicly. He had the record of Lyra's banishment removed. He did not hold a ceremony or issue a proclamation about any of it. He simply changed the things that needed to be changed and moved forward. Lyra stayed. Not because he asked her to, though he did ask, quietly, once, without expectation. She stayed because Ashvale, stripped of its cruelty toward her, turned out to be full of people who needed exactly what she had spent 3 years learning to do. She set up a proper healing room in the East Wing. She trained the younger pack members who had a gift for herbalism. She built something new inside the old walls. The bond between them settled gradually, not like a chain locking into place, but like 2 rivers finding their way to the same water. He was still not a man of many words. She was still not a woman who needed many. What they built was quieter than anyone watching from the outside might have expected. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it had cost enough that neither of them treated it lightly. One evening, near the end of autumn, they stood together at the edge of the Ashvale forest. The trees had gone gold, and the air smelled of cold and earth. This was the same forest that bordered the same grounds where, 3 years before, she had walked away without looking back. She was not the same person who had walked away, neither was he. She did not need him to say anything. He knew that. He stood beside her instead of in front of her, which was the only thing that had ever really needed to change. After a while, she reached out and took his hand. He held it carefully, like someone who had learned the hard way what it meant to let something go, and had no intention of making that mistake again.